Okay, good morning. I'd like to get us started. If you could please mute your mic. We are recording this session and it will be available once we link from Zoom to YouTube, and letting people know that link to session 4 on understanding the social infrastructure is in the chat. So thank you, Corey, for putting that in the chat. I also sent out last night the information for today. So if you didn't get that, just let me know and I can send that out to you. So again, this session is being recorded. There's an opportunity to ask questions through the chat, and at the end, we've left lots of time for questions. So on behalf of Community Living Algoma, I'd like to welcome our CLA employees and board members. We also have some guests that I'd like to acknowledge. So I'd like to welcome Community Living Greater Sudbury, Community Living Brant, Community Living Upper Ottawa Valley, council members of Horn-Payne, Social Services Sault Ste. Marie, Community Living Guelph Wellington, Kenora Association for Community Living, Community Living St. Mary's, and Southeast Grey Supports and Services. So today I have the pleasure of introducing Al Condeluci. He's going to be here to talk to us about macro change, the key ingredient for community success. So Dr. Al Condeluci has been a leader in community building, human services, and inclusive advocacy work for the past 50 years. Holding a PhD in MSW from the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Condeluci has been the CEO of CLA Community Living and Support Services, a major nonprofit community building organization in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, from 1973 to 2019. He holds faculty status at the University of Pittsburgh in the schools of social work and health, rehab sciences, and is author of 7 books, including the acclaimed Interdependence, The Route to Community, 1995. And more recently, Social Capital, The Key to Macro Change, 2014. In 2018, he received the key to the city of Pittsburgh, the highest civilian honor that can be given to a community member. He serves as a consultant, advisor, and human service coach, and is on a number of nonprofit boards and government commissions on state, local, and national levels. He founded and convenes the Interdependence Network, an international coalition of professionals, family members, and consumers interested in community engagement and macro change. His contact information will be at the end of the presentation. So please welcome Al.
Great, thank you so much, Tanya, and welcome to all the folks that are gathered for this, the 5th session in the training series developed by Community Living Algoma. We've had an interesting journey, and I hope and trust that the folks that are gathered on this call have felt that there have been ideas to not just think about, but begin to actually address in the work we do and in the roles we play in our community, not just our professional roles, but the roles we play as citizens, as members of congregations and of neighborhoods, and obviously of families. So delighted to be with you as we sort of wrap this up with the final formal sort of installment. We've been talking, the leadership at Community Living Algoma and I, about the subsequent things we might be doing. So we'll keep you abreast of other things that might unfold, because we're in the midst of a project that really is looking at meaningful community engagement, not just for men, women, and children with disabilities that Community Living Algoma focuses its work in support of. And I think many of the guest organizations that are gathered with us today do as well. But as for any of us and for all of us, the agenda of building a community where really everybody belongs, that is hospitable and welcoming, really to all people. And I think that's really the intentionality of the project that we're engaged in at Community Living Algoma, and it's been obviously the core elements of our training series. And just as a quick summary, because one of the things we've tried to do is not just focus attention on a particular topic, but really try to make these stand alone as well. But in order, if somebody has joined us that hasn't plugged into the other ones, just a quick summary. We started this training series really looking at social isolation and loneliness. And we talked about the data of social isolation and the effects that social isolation brings to people in terms of affecting health, affecting happiness, affecting confidence, promoting depression. All of those kinds of things are associated with social isolation. And we acknowledged in that particular session that social isolation as a challenge, as a community challenge, has been on the rise well before the pandemic unfolded a year ago for our countries, but actually had been on the rise for the last 2 decades. And this has baffled sociologists as to why are we seeing more and more folks feeling socially isolated, especially in light of the availability of ends and means for engagement. Things like smartphones and virtual platforms and Facebook and other kinds of things that we think connect us. Even with those things, we were still seeing loneliness and isolation become more prominent. When the pandemic hit, this really slapped all of us in the face in terms of the effects. I don't know about you, but I know for me, to go from all this engagement and all this activity that I was involved in community, my own community, other communities in which I was, working and coaching organizations in, to actually for all that to stop on a dime, and for us to become quarantined, for us to become socially distanced, for us to sort of become more isolated in our own homes. The effect, as I look at my own, the impact in my own life, even with things like Zoom and other methodologies of trying to connect with people, it's not the same. And consequently, I think all of us have felt the pangs of isolation and loneliness. And so, as we thought about that in our first session, the obvious antidote to this serious issue of isolation and loneliness is to build relationships and try to maintain relationships and try to sustain relationships, even in the throes of a pandemic. And so in the second session, we looked at social capital. And social capital is sort of the phrase used to identify relationships in our lives and the value those relationships bring into our life. And we talked, as we looked at social capital and some of the data and some of what we know about social capital, we sort of summarized that session by saying there are ways that you can build social capital. There's ways you can connect with people. And so we talked about how to build social capital, even in the throes of a pandemic, how we might try to maintain, sustain, and maybe even grow our social capital. However, we summarized that session by saying, at the end of the day, you get social capital by engaging with people in the community. You don't get social capital just sitting in your living room hoping that you might make friends. You have to actually be there. You have to be present. And you have to know the community, like where do people gather in our community? So our third session focused on that topic, community mapping. How do we begin to identify the resources, the services, the places, the spaces in our community where people gather? And so we had kind of a robust focus on on community mapping, and we talked about a number of methodologies of beginning to identify what's available in your community. Um, then we summarized and ended that session, that was session 3, with the notion that even when you identify a potential place where you might connect with people, where you have something in common, if that community setting is not um, welcoming, if it's not sensitive, if it's not hospitable, then all the identification of resources in the world are not going to help you. We have another step in this challenge of meaningful community engagement, and that is to understand the social infrastructure, how we might soften a community so that it is more receptive. And so in that session, we talked about, some of the actions that we can do to soften a community, some of the ways, and one of the primary ways that we identified in that session, which is now online. Tanya indicated that you can access that session if you missed it. But one of the key ways we identified in looking at social infrastructure was to identify a gatekeeper, to find people who might help facilitate a connection, a transition between the person, the newcomer, and all the rest of the players in that community resource. So softening the social infrastructure was step 4, which leads us to our topic today, which is really to begin to think about other means of softening a community and making community more more willing to engage and to welcome someone who hasn't previously really been active in that community. And now that that challenge has lots of moving parts to it, right? That challenge of just generally softening the community. And so what I want to do is kind of like we have done in all of our other sessions. I'd like to focus in on some macro ideas that you might consider. And I know we have a lot of civic leaders on our call today, folks that that work either for government or have or have political importance in their community, and these ideas all require a real intersection with community leaders. And we'll get into these in just a minute. I'll do a little bit of prep in terms of some of the things that lead up to these macro ideas. And know that I'm just tossing these ideas out there as things to consider in terms of projects, because the human service agencies that are on this call, our fellow brother and sister agencies that serve people with disabilities in other parts of Ontario, might want to consider doing some of these when we begin to break out of our pandemic. And actually, there's a little bit of lead time necessary on all these ideas, and so let's get right to it. These ideas really power from the ground up, right? And these are, basic community projects that that people can do together. They can collaborate on. They can coalesce around. we might be able to even identify some community groups that might take a lead, be supportive to them in carrying out some of these ideas. But community change is so much more um, not only meaningful, but so much more sustained when it comes from the ground up. We know in change theory, if the change comes from the top down, sometimes it's embraced. Other times people just say, well, that's the boss's idea, and they never consulted me, and I'm just going to be a player in this. So people can easily opt out when the change comes from the top down. But if we organize for the change to come from the bottom up, we see um, so much more success in a and this is true for any of you that work at agencies or organizations as well. If you want to change something in the culture of your organization, I mean, there can be a decree from the exec or from the CEO, this is what we're going to do, or there can be opportunities for conversation amongst people on the front line to get their idea of what could make things better, and then let their ideas well up. So any change agent knows that powering from the ground up is really the way you want to go for change that you hope will be sustained. Now, much like we talked about in our very first session, I want to reinforce it again today, that all people want to be active in their community. People don't want to just sit in their living room. And I think this pandemic has really, brought that out in all of us. I think there's just a hunger for just the little things, the simple things that we used to take for granted. And I hope the pandemic, maybe the silver lining of the pandemic, is it's awakened us to how important those little things are in our lives, right? But people want to be productive. They want to be treated with dignity. People want to be able to get around their community. I mean, there's all kinds of really basic, natural laws of behavior that people want. And this entire training series has sort of kept this in mind as we've moved from our first session to the sessions that we're in now. And we know that when people have problems, the easiest way of solving a problem is in your own community. That our very first inclination when a problem arises is to try to solve that problem with the resources we have right in our home and right in our neighborhood, and right in our own basic community. But when the problems are more complex, or when we have problems that we can't solve in those kinds of situations, we end up then going to systems, right? And this is how community is sort of set up. Community is sort of the place where we gather, where we know people, where we connect. But also in our community are services, right? There's, the services that are out there. And you look at your own community and you say, well, if your car breaks down, and you try to fix it, obviously, or maybe you call your brother-in-law who knows a little bit about cars. He comes over and tries to fix it. But if the problem supersedes the community's ability to solve, then you go to a system, right? A mechanic, or some service that is formal, and services are very formal. They require sometimes like appointments. They require paperwork. They require a an assessment. All of those things kind of woven into systems. And the system's goal, any system that's out there in our community, their goal is to return you back to the community so you can, do your thing. The system doesn't keep you there forever. The system helps solve your problem and release you back to the community, right? And that's sort of the way it goes. I mean, if you need, let's give another example here. If you need, money, maybe your bills begin to supersede your income, and so you're down 1 month in terms of paying your bills. So how do you get a little bit more money into your back into your life? Well, maybe you borrow some money from your dad, right? You say, Dad, I'm a little short this month, can you help me out? And so your dad say, okay, and helps you out. And that's kind of the informal way we solve a lot of problems, is by going to people, social capital, people we know, people we have relationships with, to help us with a problem. Now, if the problem persists, or if when you utilize all your social capital, you borrow from everybody and you still have a challenge with paying your bills, then you have to seek out a formal solution to that problem. So you go to a bank, right? And you sit down at the bank and you negotiate a loan, right? So now those kinds of formal systems are present in our call today. Every agency that's on this call today is a formal system in a community to provide a service to help people get back to the community, right? So families who have children with disabilities, they're trying to navigate just through life like any of the rest of us navigate, and perhaps begin to encounter some things that they cannot solve, or they're really struggling with. So after they turn to everybody they know in their social capital network, they end up coming to Community Living Algoma, knocking on the door, or to Community Living, Kenosha, or any of the other systems that might be on the call today. I mean, even the civic leaders that are on the call today. We know that we have some civic leaders from Horn-Payne who have been with us on these calls, and so if a citizen has a problem that they can't solve in their own community with their own social capital, they turn to the mayor, right? They might call the mayor. And, so they'll call Mayor Fort, and they'll, present their problem to the mayor. And then the mayor's job is to try to help, as a system, because the mayor, represents a system. So the human service system has these kinds of elements. And if you look at this slide, we know that most human service systems, most services are micro-oriented. That is, they focus in on a specific element of the problem, right? A bank, focuses in on your resources and your ability to pay back a loan, right? So they want to see your bills. They want to know that you won't default on the loan, right? And human service systems require formal appointments. People have to call. I want to see Tanya, and set up an appointment with her. There's paperwork in any system. It assesses the problem. Experts make recommendations for here's how we're going to solve the problem. We're going to give you this loan. We're going to give you this, training. We're going to, give you this equipment, whatever the recommendation is based on an assessment of the problem. Now, there's also in systems payment required and compliance required. And every human service professional on this phone, especially folks in the management level, they know that you just can't give things away. There has to be resources that you get in order to meet the demands of the needs of people who reach out to you. And so if the customer can't pay, then you look for, well, are there, grants, or is there other funding that might be available? And there's compliance, right? You have to meet regulations, and you have to meet certain expectations and deadlines. And then the goal is to fix the problem. This is kind of the classic way that we react between community. Some of the theorists, you call it the life world, and services, right? Yet we know, gathering here today, that some systems just haven't been able to solve the problems, right? And now this is an interesting dilemma, because in some ways we've created a mentality in our societies, that the minute you are not able to solve your problem, you got to go to a system. The system will help you out. Now, here's the I think the important point of all this: the more social capital you have, the more assistance you get in the life world of solving your problem without using a system, without having to go and petition to a system. Because in some ways, going to a system is, you have your hat in your hand, and you're sitting on the other side of the desk. I don't know if any of you have ever petitioned a system for something. I have. And I got to tell you, you feel it's disempowering. It is. You feel like you get questions, and people don't trust what you're saying. And I remember, with my dad. I think I've shared with you in this series. My dad had Parkinson's, and the family supported dad until dad had total support needs, and it superseded what my mom could do, what my brother and my sisters and I could do, given all the demands we had on our lives with our own families, with our jobs and whatnot. And so we went to the area agency on aging. I went with my dad in order to sign him up to see if we could get some attendant support, an attendant who come in the house and really help my mom. My mom just couldn't lift my dad up, and my dad needed total care. And so, there I was, I've been in the human service system like my whole life. And here I am on the other side of the desk with my hat in my hand, feeling like I'm begging for something, and getting all these questions from, the professional on the other side of the desk who represented the system, and asking us, things that were, insultive in some ways. And it just really, really, awakened me to this juxtaposition between solving issues in your community with your own networks versus going to a formal system and having to grovel in order to get some basic thing that you need. Now, there's always going to be the need for systems, and I'm not here, I'm not bad rapping human service systems, government systems, even commercial systems, banks or mechanics or any of that. I mean, that's just the natural interplay in community. But I am here to try to sensitize us to the notion that if you engage more in community, if you build more relationships, then there's less need for these formal systems to bail you out or to help solve your problems, right? Now, change theory, we've talked about this in our previous sessions. We know there's two sort of avenues here. One is on the micro side. How do we change the individual to fit the community? And then on the macro side, how do we change the community to accept the person as they are, right? So those are just two general sort of themes or paradigms about change. And as we kind of think about how do we change community to make it softer, to make it more willing and accepting of someone who has been disregarded, it's important that we understand that micro change is much more of a clinical or a therapeutic change approach. Um, and it really attempts to modify the person so that the person is able to then go on and do the things that they want in the life world. And that clinical model, I think we've even had an analytic lens on that in a previous session where we said that in a micro change model, it really focuses in on the person and what they're struggling with. And it basically assumes that if we do something to the person or we fix the person, that'll solve the problem. Now, we know, those of us gathered here, that's too simplistic, that community issues really require community change, right? And how, this really gets us into that macro track and thinking about the environment, the community around us, the attitudes and perceptions that the community has, and how we might be able to influence that. And again, an analytic lens on a macro change model where we're really looking at how do we change assumptions and perceptions? How do we create a kinder, gentler community, right? That's really the macro challenge. And obviously, we could try to legislate a kinder, gentle community. And by saying that, I mean we could try to pass a law that would promote that community behaves in a certain way. Um, but we know that laws don't necessarily change behavior. Laws might influence some people to think about why the law was passed and their behavior, but it doesn't necessarily change how people behave, right? Um, and what really, I mean, if you look at this in today's and maybe an issue of the day, mask wearing, right? And and so here you have this we have this pandemic, and we know that if we wear our masks, we'll lessen the throes of the virus, right? I mean, the science has shown that. I mean, almost logic tells you that makes sense, right? Yet getting people to wear masks has been one of the greatest challenges, certainly in the United States, where you have this Yahoo sort of spirit, where people really feel it's taking my liberty away, right? Now, the difference there, taking my liberty away versus I want to protect you, which is a communitarian kind of perspective, is really kind of an interesting juxtaposition of behaviors, right? And so, how do you get people to wear masks? And trying to pass laws. The governor says, the mayor says, Walmart says, you've got to wear a mask. So you pass a law or a policy, and you get some compliance with that. You get some people saying, okay, I understand why we're doing this. I really need to get into Walmart, to get some Twinkies, and so I'm gonna I'm gonna put my mask on and endure this insult to my liberty by getting my Twinkies. But the notion here is that a softer, gentler community really has a spirit of of belonging, that we all belong here, and that we're all in this, and I want to protect you. I want you to be here with me, and so I'm going to wear a mask because I care about you, right? Now that's a social capital driven macro solution, right? And so as we think about community, the harshness of community, the softness of community, it really gets me to want to share with you some things that I think are interesting and useful in thinking about a community change. So let me get to the right slide here. Okay, so we know that social capital has it has these incredible ripples, and on this slide here, you see that it impacts, a sense of belonging, that I belong and that I feel safe here, and a sense of reciprocity. You help me, I help you, a bartering kind of a thing. And it's about participation. You're invited to participate, no matter your, your situation, right? You're with it's almost like I saw something on social media the other day about the Winnie the Pooh characters, and that the characters would get together in a situation, and Eeyore was always there, right? Now Eeyore seems clinically depressed, always sad, right? His ears are down. He mopes. He's usually behind the rest of the characters, yet he's always there, and they want him there. And if he's missing, they know it. They don't expect him to change. They don't hold him accountable to have to be happy, right? Uh, Eeyore is appreciated as he is, right? Now, that's some of the juice of social capital, when people feel some connectivity, and they share these values and norms. They want to wear a mask because they care about you, right? So that notion of a softer community, which promotes social capital, and which we talked about. We had a whole session on social capital. We talked about the levels of social capital. We talked about bridging social capital and then bonding social capital, and obviously there's more that can be said about that. But social capital in community is something that I think we can nurture when we create opportunities for conversations between and amongst people. This is it's the most ancient and the easiest way to cultivate the conditions for change, whether it's personal, community, organizational, planetary change, right? This conversation is key. And so these ideas that I want to go over with you, these community change ideas, all have conversation as a key ingredient. Okay, so it's not our differences that divide us; it's our judgments about each other that divide us. And if we can create conversations between and amongst people, those differences begin to lessen, and the humanity begins to rise. It's a simple axiom. So how do we do this? We let go of our micro inclinations and trying to fix somebody that we think has to be changed before he or she gets in. Like we have to fix Eeyore before he can become one of the crop. We have to send him to therapy. We have to give him medicine. And so the social theory around this is when we have these opportunities to engage, good things happen. Okay. So let's get into it. These ideas, by the way, I've been looking at them, thinking about them, trying them, writing about them. In fact, I'm in the middle now of a manuscript, a book that I'm calling the Macro Change Idea Book. And in this book, I have 10. These ideas are going to be in this book, but I've kind of extracted just 5 or 6 of them for display today. And so let's let's start with some of these community building ideas, and know that some of these don't have anything to do with disability, uh, or even disability awareness. That's really not the point. The point is, how do we promote community conversation? How do we soften our communities, right? So that they're more hospitable, and more engaging, so that when somebody different does penetrate in or does begin to engage, they have a better chance that that community will welcome them in, right? And so um, here's a really interesting quote from Eric Kleinenberg from his book Palaces for the People, which is about social infrastructure, which we covered in our last session. When people engage in sustained, recurrent interaction, particularly while doing something they enjoy, relationships inevitably grow. Right? And so this sort of is like, you think about it like a garden. What we're really doing is trying to fertilize the garden, and we're trying to rake it, and we're trying to prepare the soil so that the plants will grow. And that's what some of these ideas attempt to do. Okay? So this first idea is really, we call it the coffee connection. And this is one that I actually have done, and the results have really been interesting. Let me tee up how the coffee connection kind of works, right? And I'll do that by telling you what we did here in Pittsburgh, right? You identify a coffee shop, um, and the coffee shop, my recommendation is that you get kind of a local coffee shop, an independent coffee shop. The chains, the Starbucks and the Tim Hortons or whatever coffee shops are out there are chains, right? So really, to do anything requires you have to roll something up the corporate ladder, and you got to wait, and it's just too formal of a system. But a local coffee shop run by a family, there's a greater possibility that coffee shop will be willing to get involved in this idea. So we identified a coffee shop not far from where our agency was located or is located in Pittsburgh, in the Swissvale area of Pittsburgh, Regent Square area. And the coffee shop is Biddle's. It's called Biddle's, and that's the family name. The Biddle family owns Biddle's, and they've had the coffee shop for for generations. And it's just a kind of a neat, cool coffee shop, place where you come in, get some coffee, you can sit there, relax. There's some soft seats, there's some tables, you can just engage there, right? So we approached Biddles, we talked to Mr. Biddle, and we talked a little bit about, the trends that are happening in our society today, and how coffee shops are becoming sort of these, coffee shops were designed for conversation, but that's really not happening as much as I think they were founded to unfold. People come in, they get there in a hurry, they got their nose in their phone, they got their nose in their computer, they get their coffee. Even if they stay in the coffee shop, they don't talk to anybody. They open up that computer, and they focus in on a project they're working on. And so we approached Mr. Biddle, and we said, look, we have this idea, about really getting people to engage a bit more, to talk more, communicate a little bit more. And here's what we'd like to do. And this is no cost to you. We'll fund this ourselves. We're not asking you to pay anything. Just doing what you routinely do. Serving your customers. But what we're going to do is we're going to give you coffee sleeves, right? So we got printed 500 coffee sleeves. The sleeves that go on the cup. and they they protect your hand from extreme heat. And usually sleeves in coffee shops, have the name of the coffee shop, or they'll have, their logo or something on them that's related. So what we did is we ordered and bought 500 sleeves here in Pittsburgh, at the produce area, strip district, we call it. And on one side of the sleeve, how those sleeves are flat because they sit in a container where you can put cream or sugar in your coffee. And on one side of the flat sleeve, and I don't have one here with me, I should have gotten it. On one side of the sleeve, it said "Open for conversation." It was printed, "Open for conversation." And then on the other side of the sleeve, the back side of the sleeve, it said, "Sorry, working on a report." Right? And when the baristas were serving the coffee, they put it in this sleeve, and they'd give it to the customer, and they would explain. The customer would invariably say, what's this mean? What is this?" And the barista said, "Well, here at Biddles, we really want to see people converse. If you're open for conversation, then turn your coffee cup when you sit down on the table, turn it so that people can see you're open for conversation. And if you're busy, if you're working on a report, we get that. So just turn it the other way, where people will see that you don't want to be bothered." And so people weren't sure how to deal with this. And of course, we didn't tell them how to deal with it. We just said, here's if you want to talk, turn it this way. If you want to, quiet, turn it the other way. So some people, sat down and immediately, turned it for conversation. Most people, they didn't know what to do, so they just turned it, said they were busy, and they got their nose in their phone or whatever, we tend to do in coffee shops. But interestingly enough, slowly people started to talk more. And the communication level, the comfort level that people began to have started to change a bit in Biddles. In fact, we got the councilman who represents the city councilman. His name is Corey O'Connor. He represents the Regent Square area where Biddles is located. We had him come, and we sat down with some coffee, and just he turned his cup open, and people started coming over, and he was watching people engage with each other. Now, here's what we did at Class, my agency. We started to coach some of the folks that we support and know, who haven't engaged all that much, on small talk. How do you make small talk in a coffee shop? Right? If you're sitting and sharing a table with someone, what do you say? How do you start a conversation? Right? And so what we did is we did some coaching and some role play before our community partner would support someone at Biddles. They'd go to Biddles one-on-one, right? Person who's experiencing a disability and their community partner. And they would get coffee, and then they would look for someone who had their sleeve open, and then sit down. And the partner would kind of help coach the person that was being supported around how to start a conversation. Right? I mean, none of us ever, I mean, how did you learn how to start conversations? Most of us never learned that. That happens through modeling, through just observing. And so we were able to take this idea of the coffee connection, not only to try to soften people who come into Biddles, but to really use it as an opportunity for people who live in Regent Square, that we support, to begin to become known and begin to know other people. And the community partner didn't say anything to the third person who was at the table about, well, we're from class, and we're learning how to small talk in coffee shops. Yeah, it was just more in vivo, more natural there, right? So this this idea is just a simple one. You don't have to do the coaching and the bringing of somebody. You can just do the coffee connection. We did it also with our age-friendly community initiative we're doing in Pittsburgh, where we've continued this. We have identified some other coffee shop called the Beehive, another coffee called Jones's, which is over in Beechwood. We began to get these other coffee shops involved just to get people to talk. Will that change the community dramatically? I don't know. I mean, you got to start somewhere, right? So the Coffee Connection just offers one possibility. The second idea is very similar, except it's with park benches, right? With park benches. And this idea, has really been utilized in the UK, and in Scandinavia, New Zealand, where community leaders have, here's how it works: the communication bench, right? You connect with your community leaders, and sometimes the benches in community are maintained by the Parks and Recreation Department, or by the maintenance department in whatever civic entity that you're working with. So you connect with them and you talk a little bit about how people need places to engage, and people sometimes need permission to engage. And so the very same thing happens here, where on the park bench, you identify benches in the parks that you're of the entity that you're working with, that have the most amount of traffic. And you can make this actually a project where you can have somebody you're supporting, and one of your staff community partners go to the park and just begin to take notes on which benches seem to attract people. Now, some in London, when they did this in London in Hyde Park, they actually discovered that benches that were closest to the entry and exit of the park were the ones used the most, and then benches that were further into the park, where people started getting tired on their walk and needed a little rest, were also the ones most used. So they identified those benches first, and they put up a small little plaque, right? And the plaque just said, welcome to Hyde Park. If you're sharing this bench, feel free to engage with your benchmate. And just something that would offer permission. You can play around with the language however you want, but what this does is give permission for people to talk, to converse, and that in conversation, people begin to humanize a bit more. Okay? Now, agencies can also use this idea as a proving ground, or as a practice for folks you're supporting, to build, the small talk, repertoire. So literally, you can have, community partners, or whatever you call your staff, escort folks into the park, see somebody sitting at the park that has a plaque on it, sit down there as well, say hello, and begin to engage a bit, right? Now, again, these ideas alone aren't going to vastly change things, but they're steps in the direction of softening, right? all of this is trying to promote inclusion, right? People just being included, being a part of the coffee shop, part of the park's recreation, where respect can be developed, where equality and these kinds of things can begin to happen. But the idea of inclusion can also be used as an idea, and so here's a third project or possibility called reverse inclusion. Right? Now, reverse inclusion is something we have done at class, and it's a process by which agencies or organizations that support people who have various support needs. It doesn't have to be disability. It could be any kind of support need. But what we did is you identify agencies that have a presence in community, right? For example, our organization, CLASS, we had a center that was located in Oakland section of Pittsburgh. Oakland happens to be kind of the university section of Pittsburgh. It's a fairly diverse part of the community. There's some commercial establishments, there's some residential establishments, and they're blended in Oakland. And so what we decided to do was, we looked at our center, and we had this center. People with disabilities would kind of come in, and they'd have an opportunity to take a class or to, register to vote or whatever we were, doing in that center. But only people with disabilities came into the center. And just the name alone sort of said, everybody else keep out, right? This is a place where folks with disabilities come, right? And so we sat down with our board to talk about this and say, we have this beautiful center. It's accessible. There's parking. It's close to commercial and residential areas. What other purposes can this center serve over and above, what we use it for? And so I got the board to really begin to think more about what are we doing for the greater community. Certainly we're supporting people with disabilities, and that's great, but can we do other things? Now, some board members had problems with this. In fact, I had a couple board members resign over this idea. They just said, no, we're here to help people with disabilities, and I don't see us turning our center, reversing it into some community center. I don't see that as really being our mission, right? And so they left. But what we did is we decided to inventory the greater community around us within a mile and a half of our center. And so we got some graduate students from the School of Social Work at the University of Pittsburgh, and we created a survey and we sent them door to door, commercial places, residential places. And the survey just simply said, if a community center was developed in our community, what would you want it to do for you? What do you think it could do for you? Right? And so the graduate students gathered all this data, right? They took notes, and they codified all the information. And then we sat down and looked at what people actually wanted in their neighborhood. And lots of really interesting ideas came out. People said, well, if there was a community center, I'd like to maybe take a class. If there's a community center, I'd like a place to go vote. That's easier than going to the church basement that we currently go to. If there's a community, I would like it to, really help us when there's snow. help remove the snow from the the sidewalks. So lots of interesting ideas, art gallery ideas, cafe ideas. So lots of things came out of this survey, and so we sat down and said, Jiminy, maybe we can serve some of these ideas and still continue to do what we do for folks we support who have disabilities. In fact, they could be a part of this conversion, this shift from doing something for people with disabilities to doing something for all the community that people with disabilities can actually also take part in. Right? And so we did. We began to convert. The first thing we did is we took our name off the building and we put a new moniker up there saying we're the community service center. And we didn't label that it was our agency that was doing it. It was just a community service center. And the notion of starting to do some projects in our center, we went after some community development dollars to help with this because it was really to develop the community and not necessarily help the handicap, right? Which was what people thought of us prior to this conversion. And so the notion of then serving the community became another agenda for us as an organization. We opened up an art gallery, and what we did with the art gallery is we identified artists generic in our community. It wasn't disability art, it was just community artists who were starving, right? They wanted they really were just so excited to have a platform to show their stuff. So what we did is we engaged with artists, and every quarter we hosted the center hosted a art opening, and we left the art up for 3 months. And it was strategically the art was strategically displayed. But during the art opening, the artist would be there, and there we got a little chamber, orchestra came, and we got a little bit of funding from a little small community foundation for for this project. So we had hors d'oeuvres, and people from the community came to see the art. And the interesting thing for our center is that every quarter, the ambiance of the center changed with the new artists displaying their things. So some artists that did things that were tension sort of thing oriented. Then another artist who was softer in his or her approach. We just it sort of decorated. And the deal with the artists was that whatever sold, a percentage would come to the center to help us continue the project, right? So these artists got a chance to sell their items. We generated a little bit of income. People would come into the center just to see the art, even after the opening, because we kept on, publicizing that this particular artist's work was on display. We opened up a small cafe. We called it the Duck Pond Cafe. And we engaged with a couple folks that we support to literally to help run it. And we, so it wasn't like an official, like we didn't go and register as a restaurant. It was almost like a soup kitchen. People would come in and they would order. We started first with soups, and then we started doing sandwiches, but they would order something, and then there was no price for it. They would just make a donation. And then the folks who worked the cafe, they benefited from the donations, right? So lots of different variations of what can happen with a reverse inclusion agenda. But what it actually then begins to do is it begins to position our organizations as community oriented, that we're there to serve the community as well as people with disabilities who happen to live in the community. Okay? Now this is a pretty big shift, and this idea might be scary for some folks, but it really was, it was a metamorphosis for our organization, because as part of the community service center, we began to do other community events. Now, community events, there could be a whole variety of things. We did festivals, a fall festival, a spring fling, and we did this with the community. Crafters would rent tables for a festival, so there was some dollars that got generated in these ideas. Um, eh, we had a large parking lot, so we were able to turn the parking lot into like in the fall festival with pumpkins and straw and corn stalks. So it really began to um, revitalize this part of our community, because we were able to do these things almost like a classic community center might do. Um, and it wasn't, we kept things generic. It wasn't about promoting our agency, giving money to our agencies to only help people with disabilities. It was really more, this is just an opportunity to gather and an opportunity to engage. Right? And we kept the community officials, the mayor of Swissvale, where the center, we moved the center to, really got involved with us. The Swissvale and Regent Square community business group got involved. I mean, there's all kinds of ways and liaisonships that can be developed. Um, so here's another idea. Let me try to wrap this up so that we can have time to talk about. Again, any questions you have on any of these ideas, get them into the chat room. We'll try to engage with them. This idea is called staff as gatekeepers, right? Now, we talked about gatekeepers, and gatekeepers are people already in the community who have some influence. And if they endorse someone or something, usually that which they endorse becomes embraced by other members of the community. So what this idea calls for, and we've done this, other organizations that I know have done this, but everything starts with the notion that we want to soften our communities. We want our communities to be ready and welcoming, right? So what we did in this idea is we identified folks that work for our agency, and folks that we support who are sort of open-minded and forward-thinking, right? And again, how you identify people, there's all kinds of different ways to that, but we identified a staff that we really felt were forward-thinking. And then we did a cultural profile on these staff members. And we also did the same cultural profile on folks that we supported who really were interested and forward thinking about wanting to be more involved in the community. And then after we did the cultural profile, we sort of codified all the information, like what staff do what when. And that's what we were looking for. What staff engage in after they leave work, right? Or on the weekend. What do they do? Are they members of clubs and groups and associations? Do they members of a golf league? Do they participate in this or participate in that on their free time, right? This is on their free time. And then we looked at the data we got from the people we served, and we began to say, is there some match between what Al does as a staff member when he's off duty and somebody we support would like to do in the community. And then we approached the staff and asked them. We solicited, would you want to participate? And if they didn't, that was okay. It was not a, this wasn't like you have to do this. It was pretty much, if you're interested, we're going to reimburse you. We're going to, we'll work out some kind of a way for you to benefit from this. But what we'd like you to do is you're going to your golf league every Saturday morning, and we support Jim, who really, he doesn't play golf, but he really likes the sport. And could you bring Jim with you, and then introduce Jim to some of the other guys in the golf league, see if Jim, have Jim ride around with you while you're doing your round. And then afterwards, when you have some beer and you're sitting in the BSing, Jim can join you. And that you're going anyway, and we'll reimburse you. So some staff said, yeah, great. Okay, I'll do that. Other staff said, no, that's my free time. I don't want to have to be working. And that was okay too, right? We want to safeguard people's free time, but literally, we began to see some interesting elements of connection, right? I could give some stories. We don't have enough time for some of those stories, because I participated in this as well as a coach. I was coaching Little League at the time, and we supported a guy that he loved baseball, and so he and I got him to become one of my coaches, on my Little League team, right? And so when Bill would come with me, to games, he would coach third base, and Bill used Lofstrom crutches. He had cerebral palsy, but he started to fit in. And then after the games, when all the coaches would go out for a beer, Bill was there with us, and all the other coaches began to meet Bill and get to know him, and that changed that softened them to recognize that people who have disabilities, just like everyone else, like baseball, like to drink, make mistakes, all the same stuff that anybody else might do, right? Began to humanize a disability. So the idea, and this was what I did, Tuesdays and Thursdays as a Little League coach, right? It wasn't part of my job, but I participated in the project, because I didn't, my whole philosophy is, never ask somebody to do something I wouldn't do myself. That's, so that's just my management style. But this yields some really interesting, this might yield some interesting fruit in a whole variety of ways. So let's get to the last idea, which is the little free library idea. I don't know if you've ever seen these little free libraries, but some communities have really begun to embrace this. And what they've done is begin to station, and usually this is done with citizen groups, because the citizen groups maintain the library. They make sure that it's stocked, and they oversee it. But how this works is, you identify the targeted community, right? You go to the community leaders, you solicit support from those community leaders, and you get their approval to install these little birdhouse libraries, right? Now you can buy these libraries, you can buy these little birdhouse things, or you can actually build them. You can build them yourself. You can get, the community group that might be interested in this idea to, in workshops to build them as well. But nonetheless, you want these these little birdhouse libraries to be attractive and to be well maintained. and they get installed in key settings in the community, oftentimes near park benches where people can take a book out and just kind of sit and browse. Um, and you stock the library. What we did is had, we had invited people. We had a kind of like a book. Um, we invited people to donate books that they weren't using, and and so we were able to then stock these little libraries with the donated books, and we also were able to get some books that had some disability themes about them that might be, a little bit more to help awaken people. But we stock the libraries and then we maintain them. So we kind of go around the community, just make sure that they're operable, make sure that no one is, putting things in there that shouldn't be in there. Um, and we do this with some folks we support who help with this, and with the local community group that can participate. So what it requires is that you have conversations in community, and that you begin to become known. It doesn't have to be in the community where your center is. It might be in a community where folks you serve happen to live. Um, and and these libraries sort of, they give a softer feel. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but if you're walking through a library, or excuse me, through a neighborhood, there's a little library near a park bench. It's just inviting. It gives off this vibe that, people in this community, take care of each other. They like to read. They want to make sure, folks are taken care of. So these ideas, um, for greater or lesser degree, are just out there for the taking. You don't have to get any permission to use any of these. There's others that you might come up with, that would be interesting ways of softening and promoting conversation, and getting people, to see the value of each other, because we know similarities connect, and differences create challenges, and regularity of exchange and similarity of interest, begun to overcome some of these negative elements of difference. So all community ideas are blunt if they don't have behind them a living spirit. All of these ideas, there's a kind of a spirit of connection, there's a spirit of engagement, there's a spirit of community, in these ideas. Okay? So community and social capital, we know that when communities get softened, there's more, the ethics begin to get better in a community. It influences pro-social behaviors as people get to know one another. Um, they they become more respectful. So we know that social capital in community does some, powerful things, for the people. We know that when you're cooperating, cooperation has always been the way that community has advanced. It's never been through competition, by the way. That's a fallacy. That it's always been cooperation that has advanced society and community. And this is a great quote from Margaret Wheatley. Um, One of the biggest flaws in our Western approach is that competition creates strong and healthy systems. But competition among individuals is not the dominant way life works. Um, it's always cooperation that increases over time a living system. Um, Collaboration, partnering, are the keys, not competition. So Sir Francis Drake said there must be a beginning to any great matter, but continuing until the end, until it be thoroughly finished, that yields the true glory. And we've made some real great strides in supporting folks and families who are experiencing disabilities, right? we've done, you know, I mean, every agency that's on this call are to be commended for the things that you've done in, you know, in helping people lead better lives. But we've just scratched the surface of community. And that there is so much more for us to do. And I think we have a responsibility to do. For us to stay in our own little cocoons, you know, I don't know, trying to teach people with disabilities life skills is never going to get us to the finish line of a community where each belongs. This is going to require our dedicated and intentional efforts of of becoming a part of the community rather than being adjunct to the community. So let me finish with this little poem. I found anonymous poem I found on the internet. In community lies strength of numbers to support the sick and the weak. In community, somebody hears me with louder voices to speak. In community lies public purpose to shield from the harshness of life, to offer and receive common friendship, to protect from the gun and the knife. In community, we teach each other about science and art and sport. From this, we gain our vitality, and through this, our sickness is fought. In community, others surround us. Their dreams, their love, and their faces encourage our hearts prosper, our minds to accept other places. In community, disaster may come, but grief should, and faith in our all make death's pall linger less strongly, and our tears with others can fall. In community, lies man's ambition. Without makes larger our fears. Together we make sense of being and bring joy and length to our years. So let me just kind of close down with, as I have done in this entire series, with my contact information of how you can get in touch with me. If I know there's lots of other organizations that are on this call. If we don't get to your question, if you have a question, please feel free to contact me. This is contact information on the materials I sent out that Tanya has shared are there. But it's now 11:30. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, go to our Brady Bunch sort of format, and then we'll see what kind of questions might be in the chat room. Corey's going to help us monitor that. So let me just stop sharing this and get on to the questions or comments that folks might have. Again, this session being a little bit different, right? They're really trying to push us to think about how we can make our communities better, and what little things, tasks, activities, all those 6 ideas that we identified are not expensive. These are not high ticket kinds of things, but they are just gentle ideas of how we can make our communities, more pliable, more softened, to respect other people. So, Corey, what do we got going here?
Hi, Al. So the first comment comes from Cindy. Little libraries are very popular here in London. Most are on private property. In some of the poorer demographic neighborhoods where there are street people, they put in bottles of water and energy bars and sanitizer. These little libraries or food stations seem to be respected and not vandalized for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Cindy, that you're absolutely correct. The little food pantries that can be encased in the very same kind of bird cage format have been springing up all over, especially in light of the pandemic and people losing jobs or suffering, food insecurity and other kinds of results of that pandemic. Yeah, I mean, I just think this is such a cool idea. I remember a number of years ago when when I first encountered this idea, and it was, we had just moved our center from Oakland to Swissvale, and this was probably, I'm going to say 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. And I love to walk. And so, I try to get out at some points during the day to just do a little walk. And it was a new community for me. I don't live in Swissvale. So every time I'd go for my walk, I'd go in a little bit of a different direction just so I could get a feel for the community. And so I was on a walk one day and I went up and I was walking. It was a hilly walk in a residential community. And I got to the top of the hill and there was a bench. And I was so happy because I needed a rest. I sat on the bench, and when I sat down, I noticed that right next, just adjacent to the bench was it looked like a birdhouse. And I said, "Man, what the heck's that?" And so I got up and looked at it, and it was like a little library. And so, I opened it up and I looked at a book or two that was in there, and sat down on the bench and just looked at the book. I love to read. I'm a big reader, and so and then I thought, man. So I continued my walk, and at strategic areas, it wasn't a gated community. It was just a generic community, and it wasn't a wealthy community. It just was a community that cared about the people who lived there, and I knew, after I went from that walk, I knew that this community of Edgewood, Swissvale, Regent Square, which is sort of the area where we moved our center to, I knew that this was going to be a great place for us to begin to reverse things in terms of our identity and become more engaging in the community. So, Cindy, thank you. I think these ideas, we can bat them around with community leaders if we're willing to take the lead on some of this, or be a part of a coalition that takes the lead in some of these things. Great. What else, Corey?
At this time, Al, that's all the comments. We'll give it a few minutes or a few seconds here and see if somebody tosses something out.
Right. Yeah. These, again, there's no, I don't want you to think that this is the algorithm for, any idea that gets us closer to community. When we did our reverse inclusion, let me just give one other interesting example of what happened. When we turned our community center from a disability center to a community center, and we had conversations with our city leaders about doing this, because we wanted to try to get grants that could help us in this conversion. And that opened up community development dollars that heretofore we had never thought about in terms of resources. We had the standard resources of disability dollars that come from, the department of this and the department of that. But this was really an opportunity for community development dollars. And, we connected with our councilman, and our councilman was really excited about this. In fact, he subsequently became the mayor, the councilman. His name is Bill Peduto. He became the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh. And when Bill became the mayor, he is the mayor now. We continued to, broaden these kinds of ideas, and Bill just loved that. He loved the idea of diversity and community, and has worked hard, because Pittsburgh has, suffered some things. I think we had the Tree of Life massacre that happened in Pittsburgh, where, you know, a madman went into the Tree of Life synagogue and, you know, murdered 11, 12 people. And, you know, that happened maybe 10 blocks from where, you know, our center was located. So, you know, Bill's whole agenda is how do we create a gentler community, and it might be one of the reasons why. This gives me a chance to show this key to the city of Pittsburgh that I had received. Because and you know, I wondered if that key might open the locker in the city where there's liquor. Somebody said I ought to try that, but I'm really proud of this because it's a real acknowledgement on the part of our city to partner with you know, the resources and services to, you know, make this thing. And we have our problems, and, you know, this, we're far from done on this, but it's a voyage. You know, it's a voyage in a little bit of a different direction. Tanya, it's taking a motorboat and going off the the big oil derrick into another. That's an inside joke, by the way, that Tanya and I have about a metaphor of the big oil derrick going in the wrong direction, and how do we turn that ship around to go in a better direction. And but nonetheless, I think, you know, do anything that people might come up with, any ideas are sort of welcomed in terms of making community softer. Corey, do we have something else?
We do. So Al, Leslie and Karen have asked that we share that we actually have a neighborhood library. A gentleman we support, Charlie, has been instrumental in starting some of these neighborhood libraries, and he has one in his neighborhood.
Wow.
And then Karen also asked that we share the children's team supported the buddy benches within schools.
Nice.
And has, you know, been able to lead some of that.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the great examples. Buddy benches I'm familiar with, and you know, this coffee connection has really been fun in terms of you know, just addressing how anomic we've become to each other. I mean, you walk into any coffee shop, and you guys know this. You know, people got their nose, you know, in their phone, and you know, they sit in their little sort of places with their computer. And the coffee shops of Europe are so different. They're really places of conversation, and where ideas hatch, and where, you know, things come to life that you know, we have, I think, perverted. You know, we've this kind of conversion has really been interesting to me. And as I said, we've done 3 or 4 coffee shops, and you know, again, we got a small grant to get these things. All it costs to do this is to print up the sleeves, you know, and it's not expensive. It's you know, it's a pretty simple investment in something that might have some interesting ripples. Other thoughts, Corey?
Yes. So Candace is asking, what challenges have you faced with getting all co-workers involved, and how did you encourage involvement?
Yeah. Well, that, you know, that harkens back to this staff as gatekeeper idea that we put out there, where we started softly with this idea because I didn't want staff to feel like they had to, and I didn't want people to, you know, who really wanted to keep a separation between what they did at work and what they do in life. But for those folks that, I mean, we had staff that were really already doing things where, you know, we had staff that were bringing people home for dinner, you know, having folks come in, you know, for Christmas dinner, Thanksgiving with them, people that we support. and they were just doing this on their own. They did it because they enjoyed being with the person, and so we knew that there were folks that really would get it in terms of this idea of maybe broadening this out from, rather than just coming to your place for dinner, where do you go more routinely, where you have friends and where you're connected, your choir, or your Bible reading group, or your golf league, or your volleyball league. But might you be able to bring someone with you? And as I think the way we tried to encourage this was by me doing it, and talking about it at staff meetings, and I trying to get people to understand that our mission is bigger than just taking care of people with disabilities, that our mission is to change culture and community so that people can be welcomed and incorporated, and it doesn't happen overnight. And some of these didn't work. We ended up, let me just, on the gatekeeper idea, we ended up having a disgruntled employee challenge us by saying that they felt they had to take people that they were supporting to things that they did, and that they were really never paid for it, and that they should be paid for their time, and they were doing some of these things on their own volition. This wasn't as a part of this gatekeeper thing that ended up where we got gigged by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, where we were asking people to do things and we weren't reimbursing them, and so there was there were some ripples that were that were bumps in the road, but understand that anytime you're doing something new, there are those kinds of risks are going to happen, and you try to be smart enough to lessen risk, but in community, risks can occur, and someone's out, and you're doing a little library thing, and you're out with somebody and they fall, right, and they get hurt, and that you cannot live in the fear that something bad might happen. You get live it, if something bad happens, you try to deal with it as forthrightly as you can. But so that's why a lot of organizations don't move into community. I had board members that resigned from our board because they really felt if we were having an art gallery opening and somebody in the community came in and slipped and fell, in our building, we would be sued, and I said, yeah, that could happen anyway. That could happen, you have a building and people come into the building, you're opening yourself up for something like that happening. You don't, so you cannot live in a bubble. You got to reach out and try some of these ways of getting people connected in community. So what, Corey, do we have anything else?
We do.
Okay.
So next one comes from Tanya. So Al, your comment on don't teach how to have a conversation, more learn through role modeling and observing, and never going to get to the finish line if we keep focusing on teaching life skills. Those both really resonate with me, as it's what we need to focus on to ensure that people are of the community. And she thanks you for 5 fantastic sessions.
Thank you, Tanya. Let me say this about what we can teach and what we can't. There are certainly some things that we can teach and role play and introduce folks who have less engagement experience. We can teach them some of those things, but not everything. And the practicing is really where kind of the rubber hits the road. I remember when I was early in my career, when I was doing a lot of speaking at conferences and training, and I was away from home a fair amount and feeling guilty about not doing my share as a dad. I remember with having a conversation with my wife and saying, look, I'm going out and doing this and doing that. How about I take one of our children with me every time I go somewhere, and it would be great. They'll get to see something new. They'll get to see, what I do, which might be helpful to them. And I'll get to spend some really, quality time with them when we're flying somewhere or driving somewhere together, just the two of us. And so we did. I started to take my children, I have three children, so take them one at a time everywhere. Once they got old enough to begin to appreciate these kinds of social situations. So I remember when I was taking my son, my youngest son, Santino, with me to we were going to Boston. I was going to speak at a conference in Boston, and we were flying together, and I was coaching him a bit. I said, Santino, when we get there, there's going to be, people that dad's going to work with, that they're going to know him. They're going to be interested in talking with me, and that they're probably going to want to talk to you. So here's what to be prepared for. Here's some things that you can do. First, here's how to shake hands, right? And I remember teaching them how to actually shake hands with somebody. Don't squeeze too hard. Don't be too limp. Have a decent grip. Don't hold too long. All the kinds of protocols. And then, small talk. We'll be in Boston. There's lots of sports fans. You could talk about sports. You can compliment people. If somebody has a nice tie, you can. So I was coaching them on that and coaching Santino. And so we get there. We're at the conference. Santino was sitting up in the front. I did a keynote. After the keynote, people were coming up. I was making sure Santino was okay, so I had him there. And so people wanted to talk to Santino, and Santino said, boy, that tie you have on is not that attractive. He actually began to do some things that went against what I was coaching him to do. So, you live and you learn, and those things happen. But I think the best way for people to understand social parlance is really by observing it, having a chance that there's somebody safe that they can observe, maybe someone who can, prompt or coach, so that if somebody gets too close, or if somebody starts asking, intimate questions, or what, things that really just don't fit into the social parlance, there can be some soft editing and some opportunity to, to have people understand, well, this is how you engage, and so much of that just happens through being there, having a chance to actually be there. Now, many of the people we support in the various agencies that are on our call today, they haven't had much, social community experience. They haven't been out there all that much. And then when you overlay perhaps a cognitive issue or an intellectual issue into the situation, those kinds of things might be also have to be considered. And but I think there's nothing better than at least, being there and having an opportunity to watch and then try. Anything else, Corey, that we have? We're coming up on 10 till. I know folks have other things they need to do.
Yeah, so a quick couple comments. So one, a reminder of how community gardens can involve anybody in the community. And then there's involvement with community gardens that actually give back. Those gardens produce food for
Yeah.
local food banks.
Yes. Wow, that's a wonderful idea. It's also one of the ones that I have in my book that I did. Well, I only took 6 because I knew we wouldn't have all that time. But community garden, great! What a great idea! And there's so many ripples to that. That what you prepare can be shared with folks. There's lots of variations. Community gardens is a really is a idea that has been utilized by block clubs and block groups, and especially in lower income areas. So that's a wonderful one. Thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. Anything else?
This next one, Michaela's saying partnering with other community agencies so that they can learn how to better service people with disabilities.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's where you get the reciprocity of sensitivity, and of when you partner with a block club or with a Rotary or with another group on a project like this, or like any of the ones we've talked about, or others that I knew you could come up with. Um, there's a double win in that. It's like a win-win approach, because the other people that you're partnering with, they become sensitized, they become more open. They see the humanity of folks that we support so much quicker and easier, and then they share that. It's a ripple effect. They share with other people that they know, and who knows how far those seeds, get sown. But so in any event, maybe just as a summary, um, I really want to thank the folks, the good folks at Community Living Algoma, for putting together this training series, and setting it up and doing all the technical work and the publicity to invite you to be a part of this. But more, I really want to thank you for um, your openness to some of these ideas, your willingness to begin to think beyond the supports that we currently offer to folks with disabilities. The stuff we do is absolutely critical, but there's so much more for us. I really want to thank the civic leaders who have plugged into these sessions from the various communities that are represented and are doing amazing things in their own communities, to make them better places, and the willingness to really think about folks with disabilities in that agenda, as a part of their challenge. That we've gone through 5 sessions, lots of stuff here. Know that, as Tanya indicated in the beginning, that we have these all recorded. They're going to be available on the YouTube page if you want to review them, or if you'd like to, have some of your staff who haven't been able to plug into the ongoing sessions to take a look at them down the road. That'd be great. Head over to my website. There's some other things there that might be useful to you in your quest. But at the end of the day, I really want to salute your openness to community activities and your hospitality to me. Know that our project that we're doing at Community Living Algoma continues on. We're anticipating that, come the fall, we're going to be able to see people engaging more. Just looking at the news today, here in the United States, the CDC is really, now that people are vaccinated, there is some new protocols coming into play where you can start engaging more, and especially if people already are vaccinated. We know that those are coming online, and we're going to be out of this morass soon. And as we are, our intention at Community Living Algoma is really an ongoing research project on incorporating community engagement principles and to measure how this is going and where it's going. Know too that we're also thinking about maybe some follow-ups or maybe some refresher things that we might be able to do down the road in a general way for the general public. So keep an eye open for that. And with that, I'm just going to toss it to Tanya and for a conclusion and a closure to this session. Tanya?
I just wanted to, thank you, Al, for fantastic 5 sessions. And it was very informative, and we learned a lot, and appreciate the work that you're doing with us on the macro and the micro piece. So looking forward to the second piece of our community engagement project.
Yeah.
And for those on the call, we have the information, like Al was saying, and we can send that to you if you don't have it. So all the sessions, the documentation, the PowerPoints, the different checklists, the information, and the YouTube links. If you're needing that, just reach out to me and I can send that to you.
Great.
And thank you for taking time out of your day to participate in these sessions. And we appreciate that your interest in this, and just let us know if you want any more information.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Be safe. Get your shot whenever it's your turn, and we can get back to hugging and being with each other. See you soon. Thank you.